I think last time we went through everybody last time, so I'm assuming that pretty much everybody who participated last time is on again this time. So in the interest of saving time, I thought we could just say if anyone who didn't join last time, last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago, could say their name and their affiliation. We can go around and maybe we just go by state for the moment. Let's start with Illinois. Anybody in Illinois who didn't participate at the last meeting, just say your name and affiliation.
This is Justin at Illinois EPA. I joined last time, but I joined late, so I'm not sure if I might have missed a roll call last time.
Okay. Hi, Justin. Yeah, and that's a good point. If anybody joined last time but missed roll call, please say your name too this time. All right. Indiana.
This is Tim Fields with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management.
Hey, Tim. Michigan. Okay, no one from Michigan. Minnesota. New York. Anyone who didn't participate or didn't mention their name last time?
This is Yasia Sanzade, New York, DC. I was not here last time.
Hey, Yazi.
Hi.
All right. Pennsylvania. Wisconsin. Cliffwick.
Wisconsin.
EPA.
Andy's here from Wisconsin.
Okay. Hi, Andy.
Hi.
Nice to see
Sorry.
you. Nice to...
Having trouble with
Okay.
my microphone.
I had the same problem before. Okay, so an EPA, anybody from EPA?
Brian Linnell from Glenpoe is here. I may have missed roll last time. I joined a bit late.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And Cornell.
Yeah, this is Bruce Lauber from Cornell.
And Barbara Newth from Cornell.
Welcome, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, did I miss anybody or any state or organization?
This is Brandon Reed. I'm here from Michigan. I think this is the first time I've left.
Hi, Brian. Welcome. All right, so we have a number of items on the agenda today. There's some updates from several states, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, in the next session. Then we have a short break. Then we talk about PFAS related grant updates. Wait a minute. I guess they're not all PFAS related. It says in the agenda. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I'm misreading the agenda. It says the PFAS related updates will be on December 9th. So there will be other contaminant related updates at 10:15 or so from several states. Wisconsin, John Myman indicated he would not be able to join us due to the his being called away for COVID issues, which are really fairly extreme in Wisconsin right now, from what I understand. And then I'll provide an update, and Indiana will as well. And then in the afternoon, later in the morning, we'll hear from Bruce Lauber at Cornell, and then we will have a discussion with the remaining time. So again, welcome everybody. So I guess we can just the first session, which is the program updates, and the first up are Illinois, Brian, Hutch, and Justin Urim, I believe. Yeah. and you can
It is.
share your slides. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, are you able to see them?
Right now, I see a black screen. Are other people seeing it?
I see the
can see the
presentation.
slide.
Not yet. I can see them.
I am seeing an Illinois FCMP SNA updates for 2021, like a splash screen.
That's the problem, because I'm not seeing anything but a black screen. I mean, for me, it's a problem. Sounds like everyone else can see it, though. Has anybody had this issue before? Where one
I'm seeing the same thing as you, Henry.
Okay.
Could you try leaving the meeting and joining again? I've heard that works for other teams problems.
Okay, I could try that. All right, I'll do that and join again.
I think it works easiest if you join through your browser when you get the 3 choices.
Okay, I see the screen. Great.
Thank you. For me now.
Okay, so I'm Justin Earlham from Illinois EPA, and I'm just going to give you the sampling analysis updates for the Illinois Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program for the past year. So in the past year, we've received 110 fish samples from our DNR staff who does the collection. We have 48 out of 110 of those samples were collected from previous years. We found out when we got here. That's an
Getting
issue
some
that
feedback.
I want to mention on the next slide too that we'll need to talk about in our annual meeting. We've seen that, let's see, 22 of those 49 samples were requested for PFOS analysis, and they're from 6 Illinois lakes that we had found from a previous study. And we're still confirming the receipt of all the 2021 samples with our IDNR staff. So our lab has analyzed 82 samples so far this year. I've got results from those. Our current backlog still includes some of the 2018 samples. They were just delivered to the lab. Somehow COVID delayed the shipment. I think maybe our DNR staff was working from home and couldn't get the samples delivered. And thanks to everybody's advice on the homogenization issue with between the skin and fillet tissue. So our lab is now open to purchasing a food processor to try to get a handle on this homogenization issue that we had. We found out earlier that our lab was removing the skin because it wouldn't mix up very well with the rest of the fish tissue. So hopefully that gets resolved with the purchase of this processor. There was a 2011 pilot study that was done, and it was to analyze fish samples along with water samples in Illinois, and there was 111 fish samples out of 117 that contained some amount of PFOS. 49 of those 117 samples either met or exceeded the 10 micrograms per kilogram, which would warrant meal advice. So we requested that those 49 samples be retaken this year, and we partnered with the University of Illinois to run the analysis for that, since we don't have in-house equipment yet. I'm planning to have those samples delivered to UIUC by the end of the month, and the results that we get will be compared to the best practice guidelines. And for our document updates, we are still planning to replace the organochlorines with PFAS. PFOS is going to start coming into play once we get these results back from UIUC, and organochlorines, we're not planning to analyze those starting next year. I've made one round of updates to our memorandum of agreement between the agencies, and it's going to take more I'm also working on a QAP for our GLRI grant. So once that gets approved, I'll have more updates for our memorandum, and we can hopefully get that finalized in 2022. The other thing we've done is updated the sampling SOP to accommodate PFOS samples in fish, and moving forward, that will be this revision will be our final sampling SOP for the program until further updates are needed. So that's all I have. If Brian or Megan, if you'd like to take over with yours.
Yeah, this is Brian. I'll take over. Can you unshare your screen? There you go. Can you all see my screen?
I can.
Okay. I just wanted to share my turn my camera on for a second. We've got some new participants of the consortium, so in case you want to put a face with the name, and also I actually put clothes on today for my presentation, so I figured I'd share my camera. I'm going to exit out of that though to save bandwidth. 1 second. Okay. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, so my name is Brian Cook. I'm with the Illinois Department of Public Health. I was actually at Illinois EPA for quite some time. I oversaw the program that Justin Erline was overseeing right now. I'm just gonna give you some updates on the outreach and education side of things. So, before I do that, I wanted to kind of pay homage to Jackie Fisher. 2018, IEPA, I took over the IEPA sampling and monitoring program, and Aaron Martin was at public health at that time, and We're both new to our programs. We went up to the 2018 face-to-face meeting in Chicago for the consortium. And at that point, this is what we presented. We basically said that as far as sampling analysis goes, we had a 7-year backlog of fish tissue samples. And really there was no chance of us doing PFAS sampling anytime soon. And then for outreach education, Aaron essentially said we didn't do any, and that was the truth. We didn't have the staff at public health, and we needed some help with that. And so I remember, after our presentation, Jackie made a beeline over to Aaron and I, and she talked with us for the entire 15-minute break about GRI funding opportunities and how we could potentially improve our program. So I just want to say thank you to the consortium for allowing us to cross paths with Jackie, and of course, thanks to Jackie for seeing an opportunity to help us get headed in the right direction. So the following year, thanks largely due to Jackie, we were awarded a GRI grant. The grant was titled a Fish Consumption Advisory Outreach and Education Project, but really the grant was just seed money to allow us to establish a position for a public health educator. So we actually hired someone dedicated to doing the outreach. Now, there are some deliverables for the grant, but Megan's gonna be covering those later this morning. But in general, our objectives are to expand our outreach and activities and increase awareness of advisories in the Lake Michigan area. So we initially planned on starting in July of 2019, but as with most things, COVID led to some delays, and then also our just our hiring process is very slow in the state. So we requested an 18-month extension of the grant, and we received that. So the grant actually started in January of 2021, and luckily we're able to hire Megan in December of 2020. So she had about a month of actually 2 weeks of some downtime before the grant started. So I'm gonna let Megan talk about the GI grant, and she's gonna speak about that later this morning. But I want to transition into the normal, advisory update activities we normally present on. Due to COVID, we didn't have any advisory updates released in 2020. So in 2021, we had basically 2 years worth of advisories. So we had 32 individual advisory updates. I've kind of broken them down here based on category. But the take-home message here is that over the last 2 years, we've seen some declining PCB concentrations, which has led to some advisory changes. We've had 4 water bodies totally removed from our advisory list due to declining PCBs. We've had less restricted advisories in 13 water bodies, and 11 of those were due to PCBs. We did have 8 more restricted advisories, but those were primarily due to mercury. And we also had 7 totally new water bodies added to our list, and those were primarily due to mercury. So we also had some changes to our do not eat advisories. We did not have any new do not eat advisories, but we did rescind 2 advisories. These were for channel catfish along the Illinois River, or along our 2 northernmost stretches of the river. And we also had 1 less restricted advisory, and this was for mercury. Mill Creek Lake, a lake actually managed by DNR. We had a do not eat for all sizes. We've changed that to a do not eat of largemouth bass greater than 14 inches. So when looking at all of our changes from the last couple of years, to me, it looked like a success story. We've seen declining PCB concentrations. We have removed a do not eat advisory from the Illinois River, which from our understanding, it's the first time the river has been totally free of do not eat advisories. So we thought we'd do a press release for that, which is what we normally do every year. And so this is just an excerpt of the draft press release I put together. This is what I sent to the communications department. And I try to highlight the fact of the decline in PCBs, and most importantly, we had a do not eat advisory due to PCBs removed from the Illinois River, which marks the first time the river has been completely free of do not eat fish advisories. So I thought that was all well and good. I sent it along, and unfortunately, the issue with working with communications is that sometimes they take what you give them and run with it, and they edit it in ways they want to edit it. And if you read the, well, first of all, the title tells you that Eleanor River is no longer under a do not eat fish advisory.
Hey, Brian, I hate to interrupt. We got a 2-minute warning and then a 1 minute.
Got it. I've got about a minute left. So yeah, the headline reads, no longer under a do not eat fish advisory. I actually saw some, the local news stations were covering this, and they were also reporting in a similar fashion, where basically to the uneducated viewer, someone who's not associated with these programs, they read into this and think, well, I shouldn't have been eating fish from the Eleanor River for the last 50 years, which in my mind was kind of negative press actually, rather than positive. You see it in the section down below, they removed channel catfish and changed it to fish. So what resulted was the following. This is my fancy animation. I hope you're all sitting down for this. We got a lot of catchy headlines. I had Megan look into the number of outlets that picked this up. I think we had, close to 150, maybe 125, but I'm pretty sure there are more out there. Pretty much anywhere you looked at, other states halfway across the nation were covering this. So we got some catchy headlines, but not all bad press is bad press. We found that it actually helped us get our message out. So I guess that was good. This is my last slide. As far as 2022 goes, we're going to try and build upon what we did over the last year with the GRI grant. Again, Megan's going to be covering that, but once the grant has ended, we'll probably cut back on a few of the in-person events. We'll try to hit the ones that we had better success with. We do want to create some universal fish advisory signage. Basically have a sign that has a QR code, directs readers to our website. And that way that sign doesn't go out of style, essentially, after an advisory changes, whether it's a size limit or a different species added or removed. We do want to prepare for PFAS, as Justin will present, I think next week. We're going to begin some PFAS sampling in the state. And we want to increase and improve our social media posts. We're not very successful in that this year. Not really on our part. Communications has just been bogged down with COVID. It's hard to get anything pushed through with them. And that was all I had.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Some great progress there with the declining PCB levels. Great success story. All right, so up next we have Audrey Van Genekten. We're already running about 11 minutes behind, so I don't know how that happened, but so Audrey, are you ready to share your slides?
I am. Just give me a sec. Can folks see that?
Yes.
Great. All right, so I'll try to be snappy. So essentially, I wanted to talk just a little bit about some outreach activities that are, related to Great Lakes issues. Talk a little bit about some return surveys. We've gotten a number of them at this point, not a lot, but enough to see that, there is some interesting trends. And give an update on our striped bass media campaign that finally ran last spring. So for outreach updates last spring, we announced a big change to our Lake Ontario advisories. It essentially allowed women and kids to eat fish from Lake Ontario for the first time in 30 or 40 years. And this was obviously pretty big news. We did a lot of outreach to all the municipalities around Lake Ontario, and we worked with our press office and DEC to get the news out to anglers, essentially. So the press picked it up, and there were several favorable articles. So like this is an example of one that was written by sort of like this, angler sports writer guy who's pretty well known out there. In general, our face-to-face outreach has continued to be pretty limited. We started to get back into some of our normal events in the fall. So we were able to like team up with some of our partners, but many of the events that are usually like several days and have like, you know, lots and lots of people, they were either truncated or they were operating in sort of scaled down formats. But a lot of our Hudson River partners have continued to have good success with, you know, just using online platforms. A lot of classes are still, even though the kids are for the most part back in person, you know, the partial digital setup has allowed presenters to still be able to, you know, do presentations online. So, you know, they've really adapted, and I feel as though in some cases it's actually easier for them to get access to some of the different, you know, venues. One of our partners, this is Diane in the top left photo in this photo. She's our Saratoga Cornell Cooperative Extension partner. And she used this tool called Kahoot that was very successful with like a wide difference in age groups. And it's essentially like this interactive quiz, but there's like a built-in time feature. So it feels a little bit like a video game. And the thing that's nice about it is that it records all the answers. So it also doubles as a survey. So I just wanted to throw that out there because she found the tool to be really useful, and she had us do it at one point during a partner meeting, and it was pretty cool. So it's a nice thing to, you know, do a presentation and then essentially give this little quiz in this really fun interactive format, and you know, you get to keep your answers. So it's a nice way to show, you know, how many people in whatever you're presenting got the correct answers. I'm going to use the Hudson again as an example, just because we have resources for it. And I think it's kind of interesting because we've gone from mostly just doing one-off consumption surveys to starting to finally actually have like kind of repeat customers, we'll say. So at this point, we've gotten about 57 return surveys. It's not a lot, but I think it's kind of interesting. We do them both in person, and then we also collect emails from people that we talk to, and then we send out a survey. Of course, that's not, you know, terribly successful because people in New York are not as friendly as people in Minnesota. They don't want to do our surveys, but we get a handful back. So, you know, after reading or speaking with staff, a lot of people do only catch and release on the Hudson. So 42% said they didn't make much changes, but 28% said that they ate less fish from the Hudson. And another one that was kind of good was gave less fish to children, 12%. So, I mean, that's all right, you know, and a lot of them say they ate about the same amount of fish, but depending on where you are in the river, some of the advisories are less strict, so they may have been following the advisories all along. This I thought was really great. What is something you remember reading or from talking to us? So most people remember that PCBs, which is the main chemical in Hudson, PCBs stay in the fat and skin of fish, and that striped bass have chemicals like other Hudson fish, because that's a huge problem that we have along the river, is that anglers are unaware of the striped bass advisories. We know that anglers like to share information, and that's oftentimes the best way to get word out. So it was nice to see that, you know, a lot of them were sharing with their family and more than one friend. And before they had seen our materials or talked with us, you know, they knew something about the Hudson River advice, but they didn't know the specifics. So it's nice that 74% of people, you know, were able to walk away with more detailed information. So I had presented this packet, I think, at one of our in-person meetings a while back. And it's finally online, and we had tried to run a media campaign in 2020 to promote it. And then, you know, with COVID and being DOH, that obviously got kiboshed. Everything just kind of got mired. So this is like one of our main infographics from the packet that essentially just shows that in this one part of the river around Troy, the fish are much more contaminated. And we try to, you know, encourage anglers that are keeping their striped bass to go south to Catskill, because your chances of catching one that's high in PCBs is quite a bit less. So in 2021, we were finally able to run the media campaign, and this was really a huge culmination of a lot of work between DOH, DEC, a whole bunch of our partners, a lot of face-to-face outreach that happened to kind of get the packet to where it was. So then we needed to get the word out. So we did some print ads in Outdoor News, which is a statewide publication, and that reaches, kind of a captive audience, and it also targets folks that may not, be on social media as much. And then we did web ads on Facebook and Google. They actually this is all done through like a media buyer and through our public affairs office. So we help them develop the creative, but then ultimately we have to hand it all off to them. And, they originally actually had run some ads on Twitter, and they were just performing so poorly that I think they pulled them down within the first like 3 days, because it was very clear that the Facebook and the Google ads were much more successful. So by the end, we ran ads for about a month on social media and Google, and we ended up with like 1.8 million impressions for Hudson Valley anglers, which means that or for Hudson Valley residents, because while we targeted things to people who said fishing was an interest, and then we targeted by zip code, it's not a guarantee that they're all fishing in the Hudson River, but 1.8 million impressions for Hudson Valley residents, we'll say, between Troy and that's kind of the top of New York City at the GW Bridge. And impressions essentially means that, their eyeballs landed on the ad. It stayed for a second and then they scrolled on. So this was some examples of the social media, what they looked like. So we would develop the pictures, and we worked closely with our public affairs office to develop the messaging. And, it's very tricky because they're not anglers in public affairs. And so there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of trying to get a message out with a very specific word count. This picture of Colleen was one of the highest performing ones. You can see why. Lovely fish and big smile. And, it was, for the most part, we didn't, I had asked to see some of the comments, but they felt like there wasn't really anything substantial. Most people were either just like making comments about, why would anyone eat out of there, or like, the fish is delicious, which is essentially our life when we're out in the public. Those are the two rounds of info that we get. We also had, this is the example of the print ads, and they ran sort of like during the opening of regular bass season. So it was, the whole campaign ran from like the very end of April to the end of May, which traditionally is like the biggest striped bass season, at least upriver up here. So we had a budget of about $15,000, and most of that went to digital. So there's the flight dates. We were really primarily targeting men, just because they're the largest section of the population that really goes for striped bass. And, when we've talked to women in the past, they tend to be a little bit more aware, I would say, of the advisories, or they're less likely to eat it than the men are. So we, Alana, my compatriot here in Hudson Riverland, we selected the zip codes that made the most sense along the river. And, so we got about 12,000 total clicks, which is, that's pretty good. I mean, our public affairs group was actually impressed at how well this campaign went. So this is our first one before, so I don't really have like much to gauge it on, but they seemed like they were amazed at how many clicks they were getting. So I'll take that as a compliment. And for the circulation, obviously there's no clicks. We just know that they send out about 59,000 copies, and that costs about, a little less than $2,000. And then as part of this, we also added a survey about, to try to get feedback on the packet, because it's still relatively new. And while most people are, give us positive feedback when we're in person and we go through it with them, it's pretty dense. And so we, it's hard to get feedback because people haven't really had a chance to go through it. So this was an interesting opportunity. We offered an incentive, and so 9 people took the survey. Obviously, it's a very small number, and we're going to try to increase that number in the coming years. But I just have essentially like this slide and one more. So when I catch a striped bass, about 56% that took this survey say that they catch and release and they don't eat any. But, a small percentage, like maybe 11% or something, probably like one person said, keep and eat them every chance I get. I would say most of the people that we talk to, it's usually pretty evenly split between a couple a year and catch and release only. And then after looking at the packet, I thought that this was interesting. So 44% of people thought that the PCB levels were higher than they thought that they would be. And about 56% said that they were about what they thought. So most people, are already know. And this is kind of, it's interesting that it's kind of a little correlation between the people who don't do any eating anyway. Oh, is it not going to go? Hello, there we go. And after looking at the packet, 56% of the people said that they feel more likely to follow the DOH advice, which to me, that's a win. And 33% said the same, neither more or less likely, but they also, there's a pretty large portion of people that are catch and releasing. So obviously to them, advice on eating the fish doesn't matter quite as much. And how likely are you to share this info? 67% said very likely. So I feel like, if they felt like it wasn't worthwhile, they wouldn't have taken our survey, especially after like reading a 14-page packet. And, most of them wouldn't have said that they were very likely to share with someone. So very small number, but, it's always nice to see that after you put something out there, people are more likely to follow your advice. It feels like a small win. So that's it for me.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. A lot of work. I didn't realize all that was going on. I knew a lot, but not all of it. So up next is Tom Barron from Pennsylvania for his program update. Tom, can you share your slides?
Okay, yes, hi, this is Tom Barron. I'll share my slides here. Let me get back to the PowerPoint. Okay. I lost my PowerPoint, sorry. There it is. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. All right, so I'll keep this short so we can get back on track. This is primarily it's a refresher and an introduction for new members. I'll go through the slides. The slides are available on the SharePoint for anybody else that wants to focus on any parts that we don't have time to talk about today. Or I'm available if you want to speak offline and get more details. But welcome all the new members. This will be a bit of an overview of our program here in Pennsylvania. It's what our fish program is about, our structure, our objectives. We have, like the others had mentioned, sampling and fish consumption advisory protocols that we are continuously updating and renewing. So we'll get into some of those updates. We'll talk a little bit about our target audience. We don't do a whole lot of feedback and evaluation. We did participate with the Cornell group and did receive some feedback on our messaging. So it's something we want to focus on in the future. But just a reminder, we did a recent website redesign, so we'll look at that again. And then we actually did some PFAS sampling, and there's some results and some things that you probably saw in the national newsletter that we, along with Maryland, issued separately issued new PFAS advisories. So that hit the news here in the fall. And then we'll get a little bit into the some of the challenges that we have and our future plans. And then finally, the contact information, the team that we work as an interagency work group. So we're still operating under what is currently an expired memorandum of understanding between the 4 agencies that create the Interagency Fish Consumption Advisory Technical Work Group. DEP serves as the chair, and our Bureau of Laboratories provides much of the analytical support services, although we do contract out when we need to, and especially for emerging contaminants. Then we have Department of Health and Fish and Boat Commission and Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. Currently, the MOU establishes 2 work groups. One is the technical work group. The other is a policy work group, which is chaired, has the same agencies represented, but it's chaired by the Governor's Office of Policy. We have not had an active interagency or Governor's policy work group since, and actually before the MOU expired back in 2012. So it's been a long time since we've had a policy work group. But the technical work group evaluates the fish tissue data, and we are the ones now that are pulling the recommendations together and issuing the annual or other periodic updates that are needed for the fish consumption and health advisories. We do have a formal set of assessment, sampling and assessment protocols that we have agreed to through the Interagency Technical Work Group. Primarily, DEP manages that and maintains that protocol and publicizes that on their website for the methods which go along with the assessment protocols as well. But we use a systematic and coordinated approach to sampling. But then we also have targeted and isolated sampling that we hit areas that have targeted priority locations and possible concerns. Like I said, we use the Bureau of Labs for all the routine fish tissue analysis, sample preparations, all that occurs at the lab. But then we do have specialized services. We've used Access Analytical for some of the emerging contaminants. Like I said, the protocol is currently out for public review. Primarily, it is a reformatting to make it easier to read and put all the tables together for the fish advisory trigger values. But also, a big part was to add the new PFAS protocol that we had adopted. So again, well, like the other states, we use a uniform and consistent method for sampling and analysis. This is nothing new here. We've been doing this for the entire life of our program. Our intent is to issue timely health advisories, and they must be, by the MOU, they must be agreed to and issued as a interagency process. No one agency can go out and issue the advice or recommendations without the other agencies being involved in that discussion. This is general program logistics that we've tried to maintain, although with COVID and many other challenges that we've had in the past year and a half, 2 years, it's sometimes hard to stick to this schedule, but we try our best. The 2 things that I want to point out is we collect the samples throughout the year, August through October, and we try to get all the samples analyzed and available for review so that we have a recommendation that we can hand off to the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission for publication in their summary books at the end of the year. So we're always a lag time, just like everybody else. But we try to get that information over to the Fish and Boat Commission to meet their publication schedule. Initially, that was in August to September. We've been here lately, been pushing the limit on getting that information over to the Fish and Boat Commission. One thing that, to our benefit as the committee or the work group, Fish and Boat Commission has developed an in-house publication capability. So it makes it a little easier for us.
Tom, 2-minute warning.
All right, thank you. So this is a the big summary. Now the table's a little bit different now in the final version of the protocol, but we try to pull all the tables together, make them more presentable. But the big arrow here is we added, again, the PFAS advisory from the recommendations of the best practice. So that was added during our March 23rd, 2021. We have primarily 2 meetings a year. That meeting we talk about advisories, updates to the program, our objectives for the next year. And then we have another one at the end of the year, like I said, to go over the results so we can pass on recommendations to get our annual update published before the end of the year. And then this is some of the ways that we've used to present our information. Again, the summary book from the Fish and Boat Commission is our biggest publication, but we also advertise items online on the DEP Fish and Boat, or DEP's Fish Consumption Advisory page is dedicated to maintaining the routine updates, whereas the summary book is published and it's kind of a static publication. Although the Fish and Boat Commission more recently has been able to maintain an online version of just the advisories, the advisory pages, and they can update those if need to. And this is our redesigned. We made it more interactive feel to it, that each of the subsections can be opened up and reviewed if somebody wanted to get into more detail within each section, rather than just a bunch of words plastered on a page. They can select where they want to go and how deep they want to go into the information. So getting back to, we adopted the PFAS recommendations based on the best practice at our March meeting. We decided to go into the archive fish samples that were stored at the Bureau of Labs, and they offered up samples that could be analyzed for a suite of PFAS compounds. Then we also collected a few additional new samples at the same time and had those analyzed using Access Analytical. We got the results back, and the interagency work group then worked to develop recommendations based on the results for all of the samples that were collected. But the big topic here became the PFAS information, because it turned out the results revealed a do not eat for samples that were showing up for a basin to the east. It's in the Chamonix Creek Basin in the Delaware River, Bucks County, near Philadelphia. So it's not in the Great Lakes, but we did have samples throughout the state, but this is the particular location that ended up having a do not eat advisory. And as you know, for us, do not eat can lead to an immediate announcement. So we did a press release, and that's what was discussed and presented in the national newsletter. We received it earlier this week. So as a result of that, we went out with making announcements and press release in the local area, but it did hit a bit wider coverage. People were picking up the story elsewhere as well, because the local area is known to have an issue with PFAS compounds already. So it's already been in the news. So when the fish do not eat advisory came out, it just added some new fuel to the already high controversy. So anyway, some of our challenges what we're trying to work on is reestablishing our MOU, which had expired, reactivate it and get it actually updated because we have some new priorities now. And try to reestablish a technical and policy work group interaction so that we have a policy work group, which is desperately needed. Another part of that is when we tried to do this before, try to create a communications work group as well so that we can better evaluate our message, get the message out better. So what some of the other states are doing, we would like to adopt and have a communications work group actually perform some of those duties for us. Big challenge is that we don't have the authority or the jurisdiction to make advice for the commercial or store-bought fish, and we're often asked about that. But our target audience and our target message is for recreationally caught fish, wild-caught fish, and it's only a portion of what you're to consume comes from that recreationally caught fish. It doesn't talk about the rest of the possible opportunity you get from the marketplace or from commercial or restaurant. And again, the biggest challenge that we probably all face is funding and staffing. Lab capacity, we're trying to improve that as well, but limited, especially in the case of emergencies and these non-routine events or emerging analytes that we are now having to get into.
Tom, I think we got to move along a little bit. Is this the
Okay.
last slide?
Yes, this is it. So the main thing that I wanted to point out is, again, we're an interagency work group that all the members are coordinating here. The one update I want to point out to is this Department of Health. We did recently lose our toxicologist that was representing the Department of Health, but there is a temporary reassignment here for the division director is stepping in to fill the role until a new toxicologist comes on board. So these are all the people that we work with and that are available if we have any questions. So you can contact us. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Tom.
Certainly.
Interesting update. All right. Up next, we have Carolyn with an update for Michigan.
All right. One moment, please. I'll find my slides here.
And we're about 20 minutes behind.
Okay, can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
And do you just see slides or do you also see notes?
Just slides.
Perfect. Thank you for confirming. Good morning, all. Carolyn Cook here from Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So in outreach and education world, we've been awarded supplemental GLRI funds to continue our Detroit Urban Angler Grant in 2022 and 2023. So this will allow the continuation of current activities, which are having a dedicated staff person to provide and coordinate outreach in the Detroit area. The person that was in this role for 2.5 years has recently moved on to a different position within MDHHS, so we are currently looking to refill this role. The Detroit River Walker program falls under this grant. And then to build upon those initiatives, this grant will allow us to develop and implement an Eat Safe Fish ambassador pilot. And this is to be modeled off the River Walker programming that expands upon Eat Safe Fish education and outreach, relaying health information in non-traditional community gathering spaces. So for the pilot, the outreach coordinator will identify and partner with a community organization. It could be a congregation or a food pantry. And then that partner will be trained in Eat Safe Fish messaging of risk reduction and be provided with outreach materials to discuss and distribute with their respective communities. So we have not created new materials this year, and our 2022 guidebooks are not currently currently in review, internal review. Where we have been growing is our Riverwalker programs, and so I'll provide a brief background of the programs for those who are not familiar. It provides fish consumption advisory information for a specific water body or water bodies, and Eat Safe Fish health messaging directly to shoreline anglers during warmer weather fishing seasons. So 2 Riverwalker staff are hired by MDHHS and trained in Eat Safe Fish risk communication during an orientation period before they go out. And the goal really is to create awareness about local issues related to fish, contaminants, and health, and increase knowledge about exposure pathways and how to reduce exposure to chemicals when consuming locally caught fish. So the first Riverwalker program started over a decade ago, launching in the Saginaw area, and that's still running today. It kind of runs on autopilot. It's pretty amazing. Over the years, it has expanded to different areas of concern, and so now it's in the Detroit River. It also is running along the Kalamazoo River, and not in AOC, but our newest program is in the Huron River watershed. So each of these programs can have variations. They are not identical, but they do have similarities. For example, one may be more urban, like Detroit, and have sites where riverwalkers visit to do outreach and education that are more densely populated with anglers compared to more areas that are more spread out, like the Kalamazoo River. And then there can be different language needs and even a difference in some messaging based on what the advisories are for the area. So this year, in 2021, we started a new Riverwalker program in the Huron River watershed. And the messaging of the advisory for the Huron River is do not eat due to PFAS contamination. And that spans across 5 counties. So this is pretty grim messaging for our river walkers to discuss. But with the do not eat advisory being dropped in the lower part, in the lower stretch of the river from I-275 to Lake Erie. So around here to Willow Run and out to Lake Erie. The Riverwalker staff can point some anglers to an area of the river with less restrictive advisories, which I think is really important to be able to provide some positive. And then I'm sure Lisa and or Brandon will provide more information on the advisory update next week. So we have a community partner to help coordinate and operate this program, the Huron River Watershed Council. With their knowledge of the river using community, they are really able to help guide staff on the differences of the areas, ranging from which areas are visited by more affluent working class or subsistence anglers, the different language needs, the level of awareness, popular days and times that anglers are there, and which sites are more popular with boats and kayakers compared to shoreline anglers. So it's pretty great because it's a pretty vast area to cover. 38 sites were chosen by our community partner as areas to conduct outreach. So these are just some quick metrics that I pulled from our Riverwalker observation forms that they take out with them in the field to observe their observations. And when they talk to anglers, they get to ask questions. Hopefully, if they get to spark up a casual conversation and hopefully lead to them answering questions as if they self-report eating fish from the river or not eating fish from the river, or if they follow the advisories or what kinds of fish they eat. So I do not have Detroit's yet. I have not gotten that far, but you can see the difference between the two youngest programs, which is Kalamazoo and the Huron, compared to a well-seasoned program like Saginaw. With our youngest programs this year, we really ran into some challenges with staffing, and we had some very late start times, as we like to start in April or May. And for those programs, we really didn't even get to start until late July or August. So that really put a setback in outreach. So we hope next year, the goal is to get out there on time with the appropriate amount of staff and be able to provide more outreach. So I thought I would share a little bit about some of the positives and challenges we have experienced so far along the way. So now that we have a few of these programs running. So some positives, having a community partner means having a unique knowledge of the river using community, which is very helpful to guide the river walkers and can support engagement efforts with their local ties to organizations. I certainly can't imagine trying to coordinate the logistics and choosing sites for all the different programs in each region. So it's very helpful. River walkers are usually members of the community themselves, so they may already be familiar with the area. I mean, they may be anglers themselves. And they can help bridge gaps between MDHHS and the community by giving this information. I think what a great aspect of this program is that it really meets people where they are, which is the river, and it ensures that the information about choosing and eating fish makes it directly into the hands of the anglers who tend to be most at risk. The feedback from the river walkers can help identify where more outreach is needed and how messaging is being interpreted.
Got our 2-minute warning.
Thank you. Got it. And then some of the challenges, like I said, setbacks in staffing can set back outreach. Messaging can be challenging, specifically in areas with a do not eat advisory, where our tools like choose, clean, cook method just doesn't apply. So it can be kind of grim. And then the program is not currently evaluated. We haven't gotten that far. Maybe we will one day. But for right now, the information we gather is from the observation forum, so we know how many people are being talked to and how many materials are being distributed, and we can glean some information about if they're eating fish from the river or not. And then I'll end it on this past year, the Detroit River Walker program got some spotlight in the Wayne State Healthy Black Elders Center newsletter, and then the Planet Detroit came out and followed our River Walker Jim around, and that's a weekly newsletter update on the environment in Detroit. So I think Jim there in the yellow shirt had a good time showing the Planet Detroit folks how he likes to inform anglers and help them be safe when consuming locally caught fish. And I thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolyn. That was really neat to hear about the river walkers. So we have on our agenda a Q&A session for 15 minutes and then a 10-minute break. But since we are running a number of minutes behind, I would suggest we cut our Q&A down to 10 minutes, which would bring us to 10:17, and then our break, if possible, down to 5 minutes. So let's. I think we had a number of good speakers, and let's transition to questions. And does anyone want to start with a question for any of the speakers?
So this is Wayne. I'll start with Tom. I don't on your table. The mercury you had crossed off like in red or something, or lined through the least restrictive. I think like unrestricted, like the lowest category. If you talked about that, I missed it, so I'm sorry. But could you talk about that briefly? What happened?
Yeah, so the unrestricted, it's all, let me see if I can get that bigger. It's hidden underneath there. There it is. All right. So all of these are, we no longer have an unrestricted category in Pennsylvania effectively because we have a 1 meal per week statewide advice that's issued for all fish, all waters, all possible contaminants, just because we realize that we can't sample everything everywhere. So we pretty much removed that category of unrestricted because we have a one meal per week statewide.
Is that new for Pennsylvania? The
No,
one
that's
meal
been
per week?
that's been in effect since 2001.
Okay.
And it came out about the same time as the mercury advice from EPA and FDA, and it got confused that it was a mercury thing, but it just came out at about the same time.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
This is Audrey. I just wanted to say, Carolyn, it was really great hearing about your project, and I feel the pain on the very grim messaging because we have the same issue, especially on the Hudson, and it's definitely, you know, when we go downriver, it's just so much easier to talk to anglers versus when we're doing work, especially in you know, like Troy to Catskill, which is our more restrictive area where people can actually take fish. So, you know, it might be an interesting outreach session at some point if we wanted to, whoever was interested could get together and just talk about, you know, some of those challenges where you're really trying to stay positive in a really kind of negative situation.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. I agree. I think it is important to try to shine some light of positivity in those situations where you can. And I think that's a great idea. We should have a separate meeting to share those ideas.
I just had a question for Brian. I was amazed at how many press outlets picked up your the removal of the do not utilize. And I wonder if you have any idea why. I don't think that would happen for certain water bodies, at least in New York, right? So I just wondered if you have any sense of why that was picked up so much there.
Okay, my apologies. I have my daughter now, so she might make some noise. I really think it was just a headline, and probably the largest reason is that the first paper to pick it up was the Chicago Tribune, and they covered it with a very splashy headline, and all the other media outlets saw that and kind of ran with it. So I think that's the primary reason why it kind of blew up like that.
Thank you.
So I guess a logical follow-up question is what kind of interaction did you have with your communications people over this? And, you know, in particular, any possibility for correction? My impression, I don't deal with them directly here, but is that they always think they know best, at least in New York.
Well, that's true. So I'm pretty new in the program still, and I'm not sure if they quite trust me yet, to be honest. I know I was involved with some emergency response activities, and Aaron Martin was out. He's the section chief, and they were not quite certain if I was capable of handling situations, but I was. But what I found is that, you know, we went through 2 drafts, and she seemed to bounce it off of Aaron quite a bit. And the last draft came out of nowhere. You know, I asked her after a week of silence, where was that press release at? And she said, well, it's going up to the governor's office today. And then the next thing I knew, she sent me the press release, which had that headline, and it changed channel catfish to fish. So I didn't really have a say after the first 2 drafts. And then they kind of, I think one of the speakers talked about how they want to, you know, minimize the word count and, you know, critique it in the way they feel fit, and that's kind of what happened.
I mean, did they get that they kind of made a mistake or not?
Yeah, after the fact. But again, to be honest, it's good publicity for us, and you'll see that in Megan's presentation. It's kind of like, now I see where fake news comes from, where misinformation comes from, because IDPH was not intending on putting out a splashy headline, but the people who put out the press releases are not subject matter experts. So there may be some things lost in translation, and yeah, I had firsthand knowledge of where misinformation comes from.
I had a quick question for Tom. For your PFAS advice, the do not eat advice, were there other non-PFOS compounds that you found, or was it PFOS the primary PFAS?
So we did have results on other PFAS compounds, but we only adopted the PFOS recommendations. That's the only one we could make a judgment on. The other levels, though, were relatively low.
Okay.
It was only this particular site, this watershed in eastern Pennsylvania, that actually has 2 military bases that have had an extensive history of PFOS, PFOA, and some other P-related compounds showing up in groundwater and water supplies. So it wasn't surprising to see it in the fish when we dug into the archive samples. But the good thing was later sampling, of more current sampling, is showing that the levels are a bit lower. They're still in an advisory level, but not the do not eat like it was for, and these samples would have come from 2013 to 17 when they had the above the do not eat level.
Yeah, we've also seen primarily PFOS in our water bodies, but occasionally we come up with another PFAS compound, which is surprisingly high. Any other questions for the speakers? We have another couple, about 2 minutes, and then we can take a break.
I guess if there's no one else, Tom, question, one of the issues we've had for archive samples is that we typically store with Teflon line caps, and which can be a problem with the PFAS. Was that an issue for your lab? And did you have any way of dealing with it if it was?
That I don't know. Particular, I don't know that we have anybody on the meeting today from the lab. Chuck or anybody else out there? Much of this was being coordinated with Tim Wirtz and the Bureau of Labs, but they verified that the samples were adequate and would be appropriate for use in this analysis. So I would imagine they considered all that.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
I don't have details
curious.
for it. Sorry.
Yeah, just curious because that's been an issue for us in using archive samples, that we actually store the organic PCB analysis and the PFAS analysis in different jars.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll see if I can get an answer for you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
So I think we had 10 minutes, and then we could take a break. 5 minutes seems really short, but if we could try to be back in 5 minutes, it'll help us get on schedule. 5 minutes would be 10:22 EST anyway. Okay, see you in a few minutes. All right, I'll give it another minute or so for folks to get back.
I saw Pat joined. Are you still with us, Pat?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks.
Hi, Pat.
Hi. Sounds like the meeting is going really well. I joined late, but sounds like an interesting discussion.
Hey, Pat, how's retirement?
It's great. I love not working.
See, she slept in this morning.
What'd she do this morning?
Slept in.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
late.
Very nice. Very nice.
Remember, on the west side of we started an hour earlier than you East Coasters.
Oh, yeah, right.
All right. Okay, so up next, we were going to have a presentation from John Myman, but he has been called away due to COVID issues in Wisconsin. So Audrey Van Genekten, who was going to also present on the same topic, will start. Audrey, with us. Hi.
Hello. Let me share my screen again. All right. Can you guys see that? Make sure it's still...
Yes.
Okay, great. So Henry's going to talk a little bit about his portion of the grant, but essentially New York State received one of the EPA Great Lakes grants, and it has two components. Henry will talk about the technical review to update the mercury advisories in the Adirondacks. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the work that we're developing to do with the Burmese anglers. And so our focus for year one and then moving into year two, we're essentially choosing some of the fish advisory materials that we want to test. And the goal is essentially we're going to hire one of our community members in the Karen community in Albany to start. And we're really going to be focusing in Albany first and then moving to Syracuse and Buffalo. And we have, we have Burmese populations throughout the state, and they eat a lot of fish. And so for this project, essentially our plan was to redesign some of our fish advisory materials with their help, do some focus groups to give us some feedback on these materials, and then based on the feedback, update those materials, move to the other areas, and do a similar process to try to come up with a fish advisory that's essentially understandable and culturally appropriate for these anglers. So DOH has worked with a number of the different groups from Burma for the past 6 to 7 years, maybe a little bit longer. We know from our work, a little bit of our work anyway, with the anglers that we have, color-coded maps that show sort of like better waters. So anything in blue is considered a 4 meal per month water, and anything in red will have a specific advisory. We know from our previous work that those were by far the most popular piece that we gave to them essentially. But we have so many questions that we still need to answer, and we really just need to have focus groups and to work with the community to find out what works best for them. We know that literacy level can most certainly be an issue with this group. I mean, not even in English, but even just in their own language. I've long held doubts that just translating existing materials will be sufficient. We know that we need to come up with something that's a little bit more simple and something that is more graphically based, because it really helps them focus in on the messages. And so we also use in New York, we have different advisories for the general population and the sensitive population. But is this advice really actionable for the Burmese? They tend to eat and large family units and everyone is together. There's multi-generational families. So, you know, we want to find out more about what is actionable, and that perhaps the best way to display the advice for this population is to just go with the sensitive population advice to be extra protective if everyone in the family is eating the fish. My slide is taking long. Some of the other main questions that we're trying to get at. So for many waters, New York recommends anglers trim and skin the fish and cook so the fat drips off. But is this like really culturally appropriate? You know, is this advice that they would follow? Because essentially it would be asking Burmese anglers to stop preparing the fish in their traditional way, which is usually whole fish, and oftentimes it's either fried or they'll use it in soups and stews. So we have questions around this, and then we're also trying to balance the access to fish while reducing exposure. So we're trying to explore strategies to find out what would be the easiest for our Burmese anglers to follow. You know, and some examples of this is, you know, essentially promoting the choose better waters messaging, which for the most part, in most of our counties, there are better waters that they can choose to fish from. Also, you know, substituting some supermarket fish. So maybe making fish paste from locally caught fish, maybe they can do that with some supermarket fish or buy supermarket fish paste. They could also be trying to substitute some of like the kind of more strongly tasting fish in their soups and stews to, you know, do a combo of trim and skin and still be able to put some whole fish in there if they're from the supermarket. But again, like, which of these strategies make sense to them, and which strategies would they be, you know, willing to follow? So we're also planning on asking a series of baseline questions so we can kind of get a feel for how long they've been in the U.S., whether they've heard anything about advisories in the past, and to be able to gauge their level of fish consumption locally, because they also may differ community to community. So this is like just a really rough draft example of some of the work that we're doing preliminarily before we bring on our person who hopefully will be able to come on very shortly. We've gotten the okay to hire, so it's all just a matter of trying to make it all work out. So like, you know, our old fish advisory, you know, guide was just very dense. This was not going to work out for this group at all. So we tried to make it, you know, a little bit more, we tried to simplify it, less words, and really try to highlight it with some photos. So our goal is to essentially have some starting materials to show them. And then from there, you know, we'll ask specific questions about, like, you know, what they think the key messages are, what works, what doesn't work. And this is work that we also did with the St. Regis Akwesasne tribe, and it was very successful in having a starting point and then, you know, working with the community to figure out what was best for them. You know, and even just understanding how our tables are set up in our usual advisories. You know, we might tell them to go to the website or to check the brochure, but, you know, what about the frequency denominator? Like, we don't really know all that much about, like, you know, graphically, do they understand a month is 30 days? Like, do they think of time the same way that we do? Like, is a week a better denominator than a month? Ounces or grams? You know, and how do they view portion? Does this little, you know, EPA hand that we adjusted for our New York portion size, you know, does that convey to them about the size, about the amount of fish they should be eating? You know, we've done some testing for our English as new language classes that we've done with them, that the thumbs down and this graphic works pretty well. But what about like 1 meal per month, 4 meals per month? Like, what graphic would work better? And, you know, it was funny, we were working through this in outreach and education, and, you know, our director had the suggestion to try to cut down on the amount of, just like kind of busyness and graphics in this and in one of the other pieces that we had developed as a draft. She was like, well, maybe you can just use like a fork as a symbol for a meal instead of, the fish plate with the fork and the knife. And I had to remind her that, like, that probably isn't a great symbol for them because they traditionally don't use fork and knife. They traditionally eat with their hands. And so, it's like there's a lot of complexity that goes into this, where from, our angle, making sure that something is culturally appropriate. So we're really hoping that the person that we selected, Pri, is able to come on and work with us, because he's going to be a really huge asset to a lot of this work.
2-minute warning.
Okay, that's fine. This is my last slide. So initially, we're going to do the focus groups, and we're hoping to offer, like a $25 gift certificate for the time. And we're, Pray or whoever ends up being the person from the community that helps us organize these is going to really be valuable in just deciding whether, we should try to do angler groups, do family groups, do co-ed. And, we're working through the questions right now, and whoever it is that we bring on will be helping us developing that, and also making sure that, like, the length of the questions and the length of the time we're with people seems to be appropriate. And then eventually, once, things are done, we will reach back out and, and do some outreach with the new materials at churches and at the other community centers that they use. And we've always had really great success in the past doing these like fishing pole raffles. Really encourages people to stick around to the end and hear our spiel. So it's always it's great because so many of them fish. So whoops, I guess we'll take questions, I'm sure, at the end. But there we are. There's Alana and I. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks very much. Nice shots you had back there of the Burmese. Okay, so I'll go next. I'll try to share my. Okay, can folks see my slide?
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, so this is also an update related to the same grant that Audrey was talking about. And the title of the grant was Improve Understanding of Fish Mercury Risk for Vulnerable Populations. And a lot of the work I'm going to talk about was done by Yui Zhang, who's on the meeting today, and also under the oversight of Lydia Marquez Bravo. But all of our team members, Tony Forty, Colleen Parker, and Melissa Stone, as well as folks at DEC, Wayne, Jesse, contributed to this work. And the goal of this project was to adjust our fish mercury advisory approach. New York State has had the same approach for mercury for decades. We have guidelines which are unique to New York, I believe, and different from all the other Great Lakes states. And we also have an approach where if there's a single fish species that warrants any restrictive advice, say 1 meal a month, for the general population, then we tell women and kids don't eat fish of any species from that water body. So it's pretty restrictive. And we wanted to try to revisit that. We also have complex advice in certain parts of the state. So the goal of this project was to simplify our advice, try to be more consistent with other Great Lakes states, and address the risks and communication issues with rural and refugee populations, some of which Audrey just talked about. And while continuing to encourage fishing and eating fish of low contaminant levels. So the update today is going to be, that I'm giving, is about the Adirondack region. The Adirondack region in New York State is a mountainous region in the northern part of the state where mercury levels tend to be high in fish. So historically, New York State has issued regional advice for the Adirondack Mountain region. And that advice has been more restrictive than the rest of the state. For the rest of the state, we have eat up to 1 meal a week advice of all species for both populations. But for the Adirondack region and one other region in New York State, we tell women and kids not to eat large yellow perch, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, northern pike, walleye, and pickerel. But in addition to that regional advice, we have 65 specific water body advisories, which vary by water body and address different species and have different advice. And then we have interconnected water bodies, which, because of our tributary rule, share the advice with the interconnected water bodies if there's no barrier to fish movement. So it's a very complex scenario. So for this project, we hired Yui Zhang, and she started about six or 7 months ago, and we began work with a database of mercury concentrations from the Department of Environmental Conservation, which included data from many contaminants and not just fish, but other biota. And it ranged in age from 1970 to 2016. Since that time that the database had last been updated, we received 200 spreadsheets of mercury data for different water bodies. So, and they were in different formats from the database. So we needed to harmonize the formats, clean the data records, add location coordinates, and what we ended up with was 30,000 records of mercury data for the whole state and 5,000 for the Adirondack region. Now the question was, how much of this data should we use? How far back should we go? And one approach we considered, and the approach we've been using thus far, is to look at the temporal distribution of the data and try to determine if the data have changed, if the mercury levels have changed over the years. So we divided the data by natural breaks in the distribution, and this is just for the Adirondack region, into four age categories. And then we ran an ANOVA test to determine if there were differences in mercury concentration by species for the different time periods. And we did this both with length-adjusted mercury concentrations and unlength-adjusted, and the results were fairly similar, although we used the length-adjusted results. So once we determined the time periods to pool for the data analysis, by the way, somebody should interrupt me if I come close to time because I can't see the chat box. So once we determined the time periods to pool, and I should say that there were no major obvious trends in concentration differences over time that were consistent across species. It tended to vary by species. But once we determined the data to pool, we pooled that data and calculated 95% UCLs for each water body, upper confidence limits on the mean. And that's the metric we use to compare to a guideline when we do individual water body advice, water body reviews. So we wanted to have only a certain percentage of the water bodies in the region not protected by the regional advice, because those water bodies would require specific advisories. And we considered different percentages to allow to be unprotected by the regional advice. We looked at 20%, 25%, but we settled on 15%. So we wanted to have no more than, so if more than 15% of the water body upper confidence limits were above a guideline, that bumped the advice to more restrictive advice. So in the hypothetical example in the figure here, if more than 15% of the water body UCLs were in that tail of the distribution, the right-hand tail, then it would go to do not eat advice. But if it was less, then it would stick with the 1 meal a month advice for the region, and we would issue specific advisories for whatever was not covered. Now, I was hoping to present our final conclusions about this, but it turns out that things are still in a state of flux. So what I'm going to present is a hypothetical set of guidelines that we are considering for our advice. So these guidelines probably look familiar to you. Two of them are from the Mercury Protocol, the Consortium Mercury Protocol, the 0.22 and the 0.95, which are directly applicable to the sensitive population for triggering 1 meal a month advice and do not eat advice. And the the 2 ppm for don't eat advice for the general population is something we've used historically in New York State for many years. The 0.65 ppm is the same guideline used by many of the Great Lakes Consortium states, and it's based on, I believe it's the 1985 EPA RFD for the Iraqi poisonings. So this is just a hypothetical set of guidelines, and if we apply those guidelines to the distribution of UCLs that I showed earlier for the region, we end up with advice which changes for the whole region compared to what I had shown earlier. And if you remember from what I had shown earlier, we tell women and children not to eat large perch, walleye, pike, pickerel, and bass species, and everything else is 4 meals a month, all other fish, both populations. So now the bold here is what would be new in this scenario, which would be more strict advice for the general population for large yellow perch, more strict for walleye, and lake trout and rock bass. Otherwise, for the general population, the advice is unchanged. For the sensitive population, it's more strict for a number of species in the bottom row, and they go from 4 meals a month to 1 meal a month. So overall, this is a more conservative regional advice, but the upside in terms of risk communication is that the number of specific water bodies for which we have advice, which was 65 in the region, goes to 21 in this scenario. So that would be a big advantage in simplifying the advice.
2 minutes, Henry.
Thank you. Actually, I'm on my final slide, so I guess I'm ahead of schedule. So we will try to finalize our decision making on the new regional advice for the Adirondack region and the resulting specific advisories. And once that occurs, we will, we'll work with outreach and education and DEC to release to the public our advice changes. And then we, in the meantime, are going to continue the data analysis for the rest of the state. And we will consider possibly statewide advice for some species beyond the current one meal per week advice. Or we may consider other regions of the state which may require advice. And as far as I know, we're the only state with regional advice, so it'd be interesting to hear in the discussion if others have any feedback on that. So that's it for me, and I'll stop sharing if I can. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that. Can somebody? Can somebody take the? I've stopped sharing, right? Yeah. So anyway, so up next. Yeah, great, thanks. Up next is Brian Cook again, and with Megan Bowers.
Henry, you're still sharing.
Am I?
At the last meeting, I wasn't able to unshare, but the next person should be able to take control. Well, there you go. It worked.
Did that unshare? Okay, just click the next.
This
Okay.
is Megan. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes. Hi, Megan.
Okay, and can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So my name is Megan Bowers, and I am the health educator for the toxicology section here at the Illinois Department of Health. And as Brian mentioned earlier, Jackie helped IDPH apply for the grant that funded my position. So I'm very thankful for that. But also all of you that have helped me this past year. I've posted quite a few questions on the SharePoint site, and they've all been answered. So thank you for that. And I've emailed some of you directly, and you guys have been very helpful to me in my past year. Here is a quick overview of our objectives. So complete the annual fish advisory update and associated website content, complete at least 5 training workshops or community outreach events, including the 2021 Illinois State Fair, publish an annual press release, and post new content on the IDPH social media sites at least once per month between April and October of 2021, update or revise 100% of the program's current educational materials, and our outcome measures are to measure the number of people that visit the Illinois Fish Advisory website. Our goal is to increase the number of unique page views to between 30,000 and 40,000, the number of people that view, like, or share plain social media posts, measure the number of people that attend public meetings, training workshops, or other community outreach events, and measure the number of WIC clinic clients that receive fish consumption guidance. As you can see, the highest number for the 2020 year was 389, and that was on March 29th. We are assuming that this was because IDPH was working on the updated advisories for 2020. The second highest day was on August 3rd with 337 views. We aren't really sure what triggered an uptick here, but 2020 saw a total of 20,094 page views. For 2021, since we still have the remainder of December left, we don't have the complete tally for 2021, and it stops at October 9th. This is because IDPH switched to a different program, and they would have had to generate a completely different report after the 9th, which we'll have them do in January, but this is the first report gathered, and it was involving the dates I was most interested in. So you can see a very large increase in views on August 18th with 1,677 views, followed by 1,192 views on August 19th. This is because IDPH put out a press release with the 2020 and 2021 advisory updates. As Brian mentioned, the 2020 updates never got published due to COVID and was highlighted along the 2021 updates. However, the main reason there was such a large uptick in views was due to the misinterpretation of the press release, which Brian expanded on earlier, so I won't go into details on that. So far in 2021, we have a total of 28,859 page views. For outreach events for the 2021 year, we were able to attend outreach events at 6 different locations for 7 total events. Attending at least 5 outreach events was an objective for the GLRI grant. However, it was a bit difficult to find enough events on Lake Michigan with the pandemic, home base being located in central Illinois and the small area of Lake Michigan that we have access to. But we were lucky enough to be able to attend the family fishing event at Northerly Island Visitor Center, hosted by Chicago Park District on 2 different occasions. For events, we try to tally how many interactions we have hourly. We defined an interaction as being any form of communication with the public where fish-related information was discussed. If they asked a question, took our survey, or learned about the advisories on our website, then we considered that an interaction. So if there was a family of 5, but only one person was engaging with us, then that would only be 1 interaction. But if there was a family of 5 and 3 people were engaging and asking questions or taking the survey, then we would consider that to be 3. Here are a few pictures from our events. The first was at the Illinois State Fair in Springfield, which was part of the grant requirement. The top right was the Two Rivers Family Fishing Fair, and the bottom right was the Backwards River Festival. IDPH updated a survey from previous years and converted from the hard copy version to an online version using Microsoft Forms. This seems to be the most convenient platform to use because it was easily accessible using a QR code. So one could take it on their own phone if they preferred that route. And you can see at the top portion of the board that they were able to scan it themselves, or we have our tablet right there that they could use if they did not have access to a smartphone. But the best part of using Microsoft Forms is that it also exports the data into an Excel sheet and creates a graph from each section or each question. There were 22 questions total, but could be less depending on how the participants answered each question. Overall, the survey was a major talking point for us and what I believe to be a great eye-opener for participants. We have received 96 surveys from 4 of the 7 events we attended. We were fairly particular about which events we chose to present the survey at due to some events being geared more towards children and it being more so an introductory event for them and fishing. The first few questions were geared more towards the typical demographic questions that we normally see on surveys. So I wanted to highlight the questions I felt provided us with the best information. Like I said, there were 22 questions and I don't feel it's necessary to go through every single question. So starting with question 5, you can see that 80 of the 96 participants answered yes to consuming fish caught from Illinois waters. For the 16 participants that answered no, they were forced to answer the follow-up question of, why do you not eat fish caught from Illinois waters? As you can see, we have 5 participants who answered other. These answers consisted of fishes out of state. Specifically, they said Missouri. 3 said they don't fish, and 1 said that they don't know where to buy locally caught fish. This question is the follow-up question for those who answered yes to consuming fish caught from Illinois waters. After reviewing the results, I wish we would have had another answer in between the at least once a month and at least once a year. It is just such a large gap that it makes me wonder how the answers would have played out if there was an option for at least every 3 months or something along those lines. This question was a great conversation starter for me. I was always curious as to which fish they enjoyed catching the most and if they would keep it to eat or if they practiced catch and release. Based on their answers is how I would guide the conversation from there. But you can see we have 2 answers for other. One person said perch and the other typed in bluegill and crappie versus choosing it out of the suggested answers. And comparing these results to the point in time survey, the results we received were on par with those as well. So here is just a screen snip of those results for comparison. And this question was also a great conversation starter because 42 participants chose private property. They assumed their private pond was free of contaminants, which meant that they thought the fish that living in their pond was 100% safe to consume. And this question was a great follow-up for the previous one. No matter how they answered it, 44 participants answered no, that they were not aware that Illinois has a statewide methylmercury advisory in place, which is the 1 meal per week of predatory fish. So those 42 that answered they fished from a private water body and automatically assumed it was clean was now being made aware that they also have an advisory in place. And as you can see, 47 answered yes to following meal-specific advice for the specific water body they fish at, with 18 answering no and 15 answering sometimes.
We got
for
a
those 40
2-minute warning.
minutes. Okay, thank you. For those 47 that answered yes, their follow-up question was to assist us in better understanding where exactly they are getting their meal-specific advice. I'm very curious about their family and friends answer because obviously that is where most people are getting their information. So how do we know how up to date it is? 6 participants answered other, which 3 said the state fair, 1 said not sure, 1 typed in other, and 1 answered the Backward River Festival. So 4 of the 6 participants had been educated by an IDPH employee. For the 33 that answered no or sometimes, their follow-up question was to gain a better understanding of the why. It was great to see that no one thought they were too complicated. However, we can see, or actually we can't because it's cut off, but they aren't concerned about the contaminants and they aren't sure which species they consume. For the 12 that answered other, 4 didn't know they existed, 3 were unaware, 1 was learning, 1 forgets to check, 1 was unclear that there were more than what was listed in IDNR's booklet, 1 relies on their parents, and 1 person skipped it altogether. And as you can see, only 18 use our fish advisories map, and obviously we would love to see that number a bit higher, but this is very beneficial in knowing that we really do need to do more outreach and bring awareness to the advisories on IDPH's website. So hopefully next year we can see this number increase. We are very excited about the 2 new partnerships we were able to form over the past few months. The Chicago Park District is heavily involved in many different events throughout the year and has even allowed us to display important fish information at their visitor center. One resource containing the QR code to our advisories, the other partnership with the freshwater lab at UIC that hosted the Backward River Festival on the Chicago River and is hoping to branch out to other rivers across Illinois. And then our future events, the Let's Go Fishing Show at Collinsville and the Chicagoland Fishing Travel and Outdoor Expo at Schaumburg will be great opportunities for us to reach anglers directly and bring awareness to our advisories. The Two Rivers Family Fishing Fair is geared more towards kids, but this will be our second time attending. We'll be able to educate young children and families who may not realize that we put out advisories. And events at the Jetty and Bridge House Museum are both tied to the Chicago Park District. Events at the Jetty start late July and continue until late September and consist of river walks Thursday through Sunday. So this will be a great opportunity for us to engage with the residents of Chicago. The Bridge House Museum has been implementing an event each Monday where they host a variety of speakers and topics starting July and going until September as well. They have asked me to speak on our fish advisories and healthy fish consumption habits for the summer of 2022. And then here are 2 social media posts that never got published during their anticipated timeline due to our communications team being overwhelmed with COVID. We wanted to keep them as short as possible, so the text above is what was supposed to be the description part of the post, so they could click the link and go directly to our advisories. Here is the information we provide to the Department of Natural Resources Fishing Regulations booklet. This wasn't taken from their current booklet because that isn't released until January, but we edited the 2021 version with the updated information. We wanted to create a mock-up for them because it's their first year incorporating the QR code, so we wanted to approve of the placement. And then our objectives again. So we did complete the annual press release and the updates with the 2020 and 2021 on our website. And then we did attend 5 outreach events and more to come. We only updated 30% of the materials, and 70% is still being reviewed and updated, but we have developed new material entirely. And as you could see from our previous slides of the tracking our website numbers, we are confident we will hit the 30,000 if we have not already. And we did meet the goal of 250 people receiving information. It was 488 total so far. And our next goal is to target our WIC clients. And then here's a picture of Northerly Island for those of you who are not familiar with it, and my contact information.
You're on mute, Henry.
I was saying, thank you, Megan. And I think Brian is up next, right?
No, that is not correct. Megan covered all the GRI updates.
Oh, okay. I thought you were co-presenting. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, then that's it for this session, and we just have open Q&A and discussion. Which, let's see, how are we doing for time? It's 11. Actually, we're right on time. Amazingly. Okay, very good. Any questions for the speakers? I had one for Megan. So the Microsoft Forms seemed like a really interesting software to use. Is that like a free package, or do you pay for that? And does it allow output into graphs, or is that done through Excel?
I think it was paid for through our Microsoft suite that we have. It was just suggested to me to use by our IT person. But yeah, so you can download and export the data into Excel and manipulate the graphs to do it however you would like. You can do it by participant or just by question. But the screen snips that I shared were directly from the Microsoft page. So they did that for me. I didn't have to export the data to get that information.
Okay, neat.
I may have missed this in the presentation, but Audrey, when do you anticipate all of your work with the Burmese work groups will be concluded, and I guess the results would be available?
Excellent question. We're hoping to get into like the homes, essentially do the focus groups in Albany in like January, February, I believe is what we had originally said, and then move to Syracuse in the spring, and then do Buffalo in the summer because it's Buffalo and it's far and there's a lot of snow. So hopefully wrapping everything up, by the fall.
Audrey, your photo of the fishing rod giveaway, that was pretty cool. So do you have a sense of the Burmese anglers when they lived in Myanmar? Do they use that kind of equipment for fishing, or is this sort of new? I mean, do they use something simpler? Did you have a sense of that, or did you not really get into that with them?
We've never specifically asked that question, but they attend a lot of like the DEC fishing clinics around Albany, and like you see them fishing at Tomahawk and 6 Mile Waterworks, which are some of our good waters, and they're always using a fishing pole. We've never really had a specific conversation with them, but I remember when we were having that issue with the trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what fish was that, Wayne, that we had no data on, and they were
quillback.
Quillback, yes. And it's kind of interesting because they were actually using shrimp as bait on their hooks. So I think that they're familiar with rod and reel, and like the giveaways are very, very popular. So.
Was that photo taken in Albany or somewhere else?
That was from one of the church services in Albany that we did.
Well, I just wanted to put out there a question that I had, and I think I've raised this before in general, and I mentioned it during my talk. Just, we have regional advice in New York State for 2 regions, and we are, exploring the potential for having other regional advice in the state. And I just wondered if any other states, as far as I know, I haven't heard of any other states who do that. You're right, you have either statewide advice or water body specific advice. Does anyone have an example of regional advice, or have you ever considered that? Or does any...
I'll speak for Minnesota since I did look at this in the past. I did look at the difference between the mercury levels in the north and northeast part of the state versus the statewide. And there wasn't really, even though the levels are higher in the north and northeast, there wasn't enough difference to really make a difference in the advice given that wide range of concentration for the 1 meal a month category. So it wasn't worthwhile in Minnesota to make the complication of having a different advice for a different area of the state. So it just, it didn't make enough difference. And so I just decided to make it a statewide advice rather than separating the state.
Okay, but there was some data which suggested that that portion of the state was a bit higher than the rest of the state, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, yeah, I was going to say that I think the stuff I'm right, Pat. I mean, you guys don't exactly have a lot of mountains in Minnesota. But
I think we have one.
You got one, okay. Well, that's good. That's good. That's nice. We have a lot. The Adirondacks and our Catskill regions are. I think we might have a difference in terms of a big difference in geology and topography with these mountains. That also, by the way, they do intercept acid rain as it comes across, and that also, of course, exacerbates the mercury and fish problem. So maybe that's one reason why. Just an idea. But.
We a lot of in methyl production in the northeast part of the state, and so that does drive a difference in specifically the walleye and northern fish, but it just wasn't enough difference to warrant having different advice because of the wide range of our meal advice categories.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? Yeah.
So is New York the only state then that has a mountain range with 4,000 foot plus peaks of these states?
very much so. Maybe Pennsylvania gets higher, but I'm guessing otherwise not.
Interesting. Okay.
That would be my guess anyway. I suppose others can speak for their states.
Henry, when you ran the ANOVA to kind of determine how to pool your data,
Right.
I guess I'm kind of interested because in Indiana we pool like the last 11 years of data together to make our assessments. I was wondering what was the time frame that you ended up using to pool your data, like the most recent group?
Yeah, so we used, again, for the Adirondack region, we used the natural breaks in the data to divide the data into 4 groups temporally. And the most recent data set was from 2007 to 2020, so 13 years. And then we would compare that most recent data with previous data to see if there was a difference. So it varied by species. In some cases we pooled in some cases we didn't pool any data. We just used the most recent data because there was a significant difference from the previous data set. In some cases we pooled all the way back to 1970, but if there were no differences, but I don't think that happened too often. So it varied by species, which data we pooled. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I missed that part.
I might have not gone into the details. And, you know, as we now are looking at the rest of the state, we're kind of wrestling with a different data distribution, frequency distribution. We're not seeing necessarily the exact same breaks in the data that we saw in the Adirondacks. So we have to decide whether do we use different breaks in the data? Do we use the same breaks? Or do we just use data after a certain year? So that's a question we're wrestling with. Again, there's no like really obvious trends in the data that are convincing across multiple species in terms of temporal differences or temporal changes in mercury. So I guess that's another question to throw out to the group. How old do you consider, how much in the past are data that you consider in setting advisories? Do you consider data that's 20 years old, for example?
In Indiana, we don't. Oh, sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say in Indiana, we rotate around the state every 5 years. So if we use the last 11 years of data, that includes 3 rotations around the state. So you have the ability to have 3 different data sets to pull together. Now that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you only have 1 sampling event. But one thing that we ran into was we had advisories using based on 30-year-old data. And that those advisories would just never fall off the list. Some of them were for species I don't know that we'd even ever collect again. So when we kind of revised how we assess our data, we determined that we would kind of use this approach and just use the last 11 years of data. So if some water bodies, we aren't able to go back and collect data for, or to repeat a sampling event, if we don't have data for them after 11 years, they will just fall off the list. But if we find water bodies that have high concentrations of a specific contaminant, we make sure to continue to revisit those sites. So the sites that do end up falling off the list, we already have some sort of confidence that they will meet the kind of default statewide advice.
Interesting. So you, in your rotation, you hit pretty much all the water bodies in the whole state?
All major water bodies.
This is Pat. We use the past 10 years of data for PCBs, and we've done that for a long time just based on trends in declines in those levels. For mercury, we recently, in the last couple of years, changed to using only the past 10 years. Previously, we had been using all of our data, but we changed to 10 based on an analysis that Paul Radomski, who's in the meeting, and another statistician from DNR did. So we changed to 10 years. And then for PFAS, we keep old advice based on our old RFD, not the best practice, unless we have data within the past 5 years. And then we pool those data, and that is because PFAS levels appear to decline more rapidly than the other contaminants. So we will base our advice on the best practice if we have data within the past 5 years. Otherwise, we keep the old advice until we get new data.
How long did you say for the mercury again?
10 years. And I don't know if Paul wants to say anything about the analysis they did, but that was the basis for it.
Yeah, I could briefly speak to that. 10 years, there is some linear trend data on the mercury. We also had a statistician look at it using mixed effects modeling, and the year effect wasn't that big. So conceivably, if you have a really robust data set with a lot of mercury information, and in using a mixed model approach, you may be able to use some of the older data to give you some insights of what the current concentrations may be. So it might be a very predictive tool for use in other places.
Hi everyone, Satyendra Bhavsar from Ontario. So couple of comments and then a couple of questions. So we were dropping off some of the older monitoring data. So overall, we have almost 2,600 locations monitored across the province, which includes a variety of regional areas within the Great Lakes too. So we started dropping off some old data, but as it was just mentioned, like, variety of trend analysis, including mixed modeling and so on, suggested that the levels, let's say specifically for mercury and PCB, so mercury for inland lakes, the levels have typically either declined or remained stable over the last, let's say, 30 to 50 years. So in fact, instead of not utilizing data, which would result in dropping off some of the locations from our advisories, we have opted to keep them because they are, appropriately health protective based on the long-term data. And similarly for the Great Lakes, we have seen significant declines in PCB levels over the last 30 to 50 years, and they continue to decline or are relatively stable over the last 10, 20 years. So we have been using PCB data, and same story for mercury. There are some declines and mostly stable concentrations. So we are not discarding data right now per se. And the major reason behind this is also that we do not have province-wide advisories, just like many states have statewide advisories, because we feel that is actually more unreliable than having location-specific old database advisories. So that's what we have done. So those comments, but questions then. So for monitoring programs or the agencies that are dropping older data, let's say older than 10 or 20 years data, based on specifically new data, what would you do? Let's say you visited Lake XYZ, but this time around, let's say 3 species were, for whatever reason, 3 species were captured. But in previous monitoring effort, there were 8 species that were captured, for example. Also, certain size ranges of, these 3 species that were monitored in the recent effort, we were missing, let's say, some sizes from the previous monitoring effort. So how would you be using this new data? Would you drop those other 5 species that are not re-monitored in this effort?
so just briefly for New York State, we would consider all the previous data. I mean, if it's in the last, say, 20 years or so, and just subjectively try to make a risk management decision based. If we don't have new data for species, we would consider the older data, and we wouldn't drop the species. We tend not to drop species just because we haven't gotten recent data. We tend to try to have data in order to drop a species. But we do have some what we call zombie advisories where we can't get the fish, and we have advice.
Yeah, I remember that term that was used by Wayne during one of the discussions.
Yeah, he may have coined that term. I'm not sure, but or maybe it was Krista. It was Krista.
I'm going to take responsibility for that. Wayne.
All right.
I hope you haven't copyrighted it because I may start using it.
Not at all. I think the more the merrier.
All right. I don't know if any other states want to briefly chime in. We're running about 3 minutes over right now.
Real quick, in Indiana, we would drop the species not recaptured. But again, if the data is showing that species from that water body don't have elevated concentrations that would warrant, say, a 1 meal per month advisory, then we feel confident that most of those species collected would still default or be covered under the default advice. So if we do find water bodies that have 1 meal per month advisories, we would continue to collect fish there.
All right, good. Thank you, Ellie. Okay, so it's 11:19, and up next we are going to hear from our friends at Cornell. We're hearing from Bruce Lauber, who is the director of the Center for Conservation Social Sciences in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. And Bruce and others who I believe are on the call have worked with the consortium previously. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Henry. And let's see, let me get my screen. Are people seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So great. Yeah, so there's a number of us from Cornell who are on the call now, and for this talk, Katie Fiorella and I will be presenting. Katie's with the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health here at Cornell, and she'll jump in a little bit later in the talk. So over the last 6 months, we have been developing a plan with Wayne for Cornell to provide support for the consortium by conducting studies to fill information needs, as well as providing administrative support. We had submitted a preliminary proposal to the EPA for this work last summer, and we'll develop a more detailed program when that's requested. So today I'll describe what we've proposed and answer any questions you might have and get your feedback. So let me start by saying a little bit about who we are and our history. So Barbara Newth, who's on the call, is really the one on our team who has the longest history of working on fish consumption advisories in the Great Lakes. She began her work in the Great Lakes in 1987, and then starting in the 1990s, worked in an advisory capacity with the Council of Great Lakes Governors Fish Consumption Advisory Task Force, which was a precursor of the consortium. Jeff Niederdeppy, Nancy Connolly, and myself joined with Barb in 2010, and between 2010 and 2018, we worked on a series of studies for the consortium, which I'll describe in a little bit. And Nancy is also on the call today. And then for this proposal, Katie Fiorella, Pete McIntyre, Rich Stedman, and Suresh Sethi joined with us too. Katie and Rich are both on the call, and they have a variety of expertise that added to our team and so enhanced our ability to propose the kind of work that we thought would be useful. So let me start by talking a little bit about our past work with the consortium then. This again covers the period from 2010 to 2018. And at a broad level, the focus of that work was on helping the consortium to improve advisories. And we did this primarily through conducting studies in the applied social sciences to help the outreach and education subgroup. The work had a variety of components. Early on, we did some work assessing the consortium's fish consumption advisory practices and information needs. So this then led to ideas about studies that could contribute to the work of the consortium. We gathered information about fish consumption, using surveys and focus groups and other techniques to get information from key audiences of interest about, how much fish were they eating, what types of fish were they eating, what influenced their consumption of fish. We did testing of advisory messages and approaches. So sometimes this might involve specific language that, members of the consortium were either using or considering using, and they wanted some feedback on how people would respond to that language. But there were also some broader considerations, like how to format specific types of advice, or, what's the best way to communicate particular messages that we did as well. We assessed compliance with advisories. We estimated mercury exposure and whether people were exceeding safe levels of consumption of mercury. We quantified the impacts of advisories on behaviors. Did the advisories shift people towards recommended behaviors? And we synthesized information about best practices, drawing on the collective expertise in the consortium as well as information that has been published in the literature. So throughout this work, we focused on several audiences that were of particular interest to the consortium, considered at higher risk, anglers, women of childbearing age, urban anglers, people who were living and fishing in urban areas, as well as older anglers. And we used several types of methods in our data. I mentioned focus groups and surveys already. And we also did a diary study that really was the culmination of our most recent work with the consortium. And so I'll say a little bit more about that here. For this diary study, we recruited about 2,000 women anglers and 2,000 urban anglers to record their fish consumption over 2 successive summers, during the period when we expect people to be eating the most fish, both the amount of fish they eat and the types of fish they eat it. This was set up to allow people to record the fish consumption every day, and then we collected that information from them every 2 weeks. Between the two summers and prior to the second summer, we distributed advisory brochures to many members of many of these participants in the study, but not all of them. And these brochures communicated the advice for their area, based on our work with the states. And there were key differences in these brochures so that we could test whether some approaches were more effective communicating that information than others. We had about 1,000 people in each of the groups, 1,000 women anglers and 1,000 urban anglers who participated throughout both years of the study. So we had a pretty good set of data. This allowed us to do several things. We were able to estimate their consumption with a fair amount of confidence. As I think many of you know, a lot of times estimates of this fish consumption are done through recall surveys where, people will be asked, how much and what type of fish they ate over like a 3-month period or even longer. By collecting this information on an ongoing basis throughout these periods, we were able to get what we consider to be more accurate estimates of what people were eating. Having that consumption information allowed us to assess compliance with local advisories fairly well. And then by distributing the brochures that we had developed in collaboration with the consortium, we were able to tell whether some ways of communicating the advisory messages were more effective than others, and actually how they influenced behavior. So throughout this period, we generated a variety of products, and we had 8 reports that came out of these studies that were really geared towards consortium members specifically, knowing what your information needs were in those periods. We designed these reports to address what we could contribute to those information needs as well as possible. We also produced 7 peer-reviewed publications, which allowed this information then to get out to a broader audience than just consortium members. So that's a brief summary of what we did. And I'll shift now and talk a bit about our current proposal. So when Wayne approached us last summer, we developed a proposal with 2 primary components, which would include administering and facilitating the consortium, and then completing studies to improve the effectiveness and reach of fish consumption advisories. Our role in administration would really be to facilitate and manage logistics, but not to set the direction. That's the job that you all fill. The specific things that we said we would take on is we would plan logistics for meetings and then pay travel of costs for people to attend them. We'd keep track of action items that members had assumed. We would not be completing these action items, but we keep track of their status. We would facilitate meetings of the outreach and education group specifically, and then coordinate it with a sampling and analysis subgroup. And then finally, we would set up and manage a permanent online collaboration environment, which is intended to replace the SharePoint site. So in terms of the studies that were part of this proposal, we had initially proposed 5 ideas back in June based on our understanding of the consortium's needs. And then Wayne and the EPA selected 3 of these ideas for inclusion in this proposal. Between these 3 studies, they are designed to build understanding of consortium needs and then to contribute to advisories for harder to reach audiences. I'll say a little bit about the first of these, and then Katie will speak to the next 2. So in terms of identifying consortium information needs, this would be quite similar and was modeled after the assessment that I mentioned earlier that we had completed for the consortium in the early 2010s. The idea is that we would assess the strengths and the challenges and the future directions of the advisory programs from your own perspective. This would lead to the generation of information needs and priorities, which could then serve as the foundation of work that we would do for you, as well as work that you might have others do as well. Specific activities that would be involved in this, we would conduct interviews, individual interviews of consortium members, which is a great way for us to gather information and get to know the needs of the individual states. We would facilitate discussions among consortium members at some meetings, and then we would conduct standardized surveys to quantify some of the advice or to quantify some of the information that we were collecting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. And Katie, you can just tell me when you want me to advance the slides.
Okay, that sounds. Oh, can you hear me okay, or am I echoing?
I can hear you fine. Okay,
perfect. Okay, great. Well, really nice to be here with you all today and to meet everyone. Thanks so much for having us. So to add to what Bruce was saying, so the consortium's obviously been doing really extensive and excellent work thinking about the ways that we advise and communicate individuals and families about safe fish consumption, and thinking about the communities that rely on the fisheries that sort of underlie this. And so in the next 2 studies, we hope to further contribute to deepening that understanding of particular fishing practices, can add that might alter some of the risks. So Bruce, can you click forward? Perfect. And focusing in on particularly better understanding some of the communities that might be using different fishing grounds, different fishing methods and fish species, and how those differences may alter health risks. And we'd also try to better understand the needs and values of those communities. And build the slide one more time. And think about particular communities, including provisional fishing communities, immigrant communities, and urban anglers. And we know there's been more and more work by the consortium in this arena too. I just hopped on the call after coming from teaching my class, so I'm really sorry that I missed the presentation earlier about the Burmese fishing communities, but been in touch with the Department of Health in New York and really interested in building on the work that's already being done by the consortium in these areas too. So moving to the next slide. And so the first study that we're proposing here is sort of building on this idea that studies have suggested that fish consumption patterns among Southeast Asian communities in the US may result in higher exposure to contaminants. So diets are high in fish, they make use of whole fish sometimes that are introducing different contaminant risks, and include fish that might not always be included in consumption advisories for a broader angling population. And so because of these differences, we wanted to think in particular about whether we could better understand these dimensions for particularly Karen and Burmese immigrant communities. And so, so this project would aim to study the cultural importance of fishing and fish consumption for a particular group of Burmese and Karen communities, helping to better understand how these fisheries are contributing to fish as a part of food sovereignty, people's control over their access to resources, and then also how people's fish consumption patterns and preparation might change risks for them. And then to think sort of together, kind of balancing those benefits that people are getting from their fisheries, as well as the health risks that they might be incurring, about what sort of communication strategies and ways to move forward might help to better assess the concerns for those communities, better communicate them, and sort of the idea being that the results will be used to both assess the health risks and benefits and aid you all in thinking about what fish might be best to analyze and how to think with those communities together about how to respond to risks that are identified. Then moving to the next slide. And then the last project that I'll mention here has to do with understanding fish consumption across Great Lakes provisioning fisheries. And so what we mean by this when I say provisioning fisheries is that is extending sort of the way that we think about some of the fishing communities to think about groups that might be deriving sort of more than a recreational benefit, but also using fisheries as a provisioning source. And so one of the key questions of this project, which is a Great Lakes Fishery Commission project that we're proposing essentially to build more of a health component on, is about who is in these provisioning communities, and especially in urban areas, immigrant communities, and are they a different group, sort of trying to define and understand this group and how they interact with the fishery. And so what we're proposing to add is really to also evaluate the contaminant risks that they might be encountering, and sort of in some similar themes to what I mentioned before, trying to understand the health risks and benefits that these communities might be balancing in accessing these fisheries. And I think the other element here is we're also really interested in whether they're using different physical spaces and trying to understand how they might be accessing different waterways or otherwise that could also shift some of these risks and benefits that they're incurring. And so the idea here is that the work will yield a more nuanced understanding of sort of this plurality of provisioning fishing communities, including their use of fish resources and exposure to contaminant risks. And so we hypothesize that some of these communities might be consuming fish at a higher rate than traditional recreational anglers, changing some of those risks too. And so, again, these areas are places that we know you all are thinking really actively about and really, really excited to sort of contribute to and think about the ways that we can build on the work that you've already been doing in these arenas. And so moving to the final slide, I mean, I think just to sort of summarize our goals and thinking about things going forward is we're really excited about the opportunity to work with you all. For us as researchers at a university, I think connecting to the really tangible outcomes that you're all producing, thinking about health and communication is really exciting for us, and to be able to sort of do some of the studies that might link up to those really really important outcomes. And so our goal throughout is really to maximize the usefulness of this work for you in advising the work that you do. So we'd be happy to take any questions and would really welcome any feedback that you have as we develop some of the more detailed proposals too.
Thank you both. That was great to hear. It's we, you know, as a consortium, I think we've been concerned about our funding stream ending and how, you know, trying to find a way to continue. And I think a partnership with Cornell and your program would be wonderful. So just really happy to hear meet you and hear your presentations. Any questions for Bruce and Katie?
This is Wayne. If no one else has a question, I mean, a comment, that one of the things that I saw is that both Bruce and Katie have touched on things that folks have talked about today. And one of the places where I see value here is in doing some synthesis and getting folks to maybe even talk together who are doing things, some bringing about, but also synthesize and generalizing some of the findings and maybe recommending good practices that people can use in other states or approaches that people can take in other states. And one particular thing, when Audrey was talking, I was thinking is so maybe it sounds like the Burmese are eating non-traditional fish in some cases, the whole fish or fish paste, and should we our programs on the collection analysis and where we've really focused on sport fish, are there species and places that we should be focusing on other fish species?
Yeah, I think your point is a really good one, Wayne, and I think your idea about, you know, trying to synthesize and build off and integrate the work that's being done is certainly something that we would hope to be able to do in this context.
Yeah, this is Tony. I was just wondering, I'm sorry if I missed this as part of the presentation, but I mean, I know it's at this point, you guys are going to rely on your federal grants, I guess. Is that the case? And what our prospects are?
Yeah, so yeah, this is absolutely reliant on getting the GLRI grant that we put in for.
Sorry,
yeah.
That's inherently part of this. I somehow missed that detail, but yeah, okay. So it's all, we don't know what our prospects are, do we, at this point?
No, we don't. Yeah, I followed up a bit with Derek, and I will follow up with him some more. As he mentioned last time, they're still trying to figure out what to do with all the stuff Jackie was working on.
Yeah, another reason why we miss Jackie. Can I say? All right.
But Wayne, in any case, you'd have to write, you and Cornell, I guess, would have to write a full proposal, a work plan, and then that would take time to get approved and funded, and perhaps funding would start in the fall of 2022 if we got it.
Well, I would hope a little sooner than that. So, yeah, I mean, the typical process for GLRI grant is we do the proposal concept, and then you get invited to apply for a grant, and there's a full work plan in that. And then we would also, once funded, have to do a QAP, so all those things. And the other piece of this, which Bruce and others at Cornell and I've been worked on, is there's an MOU between DEC and Cornell. So we've been working on that so that we'd be pretty much ready to go as soon as we can on that end of things.
Mm-hmm. Good.
This is Pat. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. When Wayne and Andy and I were talking about developing the proposal with Cornell, we were discussing ideas for this research that they presented, the 3 projects. And the full proposal will provide an opportunity to develop more details on that. I mean, we heard today that it sounds like there's some overlap between what is being proposed by Cornell and what's being done in New York. And our intent wasn't to reproduce that, but to try to, as Wayne said, synthesize and move forward and share what's being learned by everyone in a best practice way, maybe, or, you know, something to that effect. But I just wanted to say that when we talked about a Burmese proposal or proposal for outreach with Burmese, I had heard from the consortium members, other than New York and Wisconsin, who are already doing work, that others are interested in outreach by Burmese. So we thought this was a good opportunity to share information and then extend it to other areas. So just a little bit more background on the thinking behind that, and hopefully there can be some discussion about what the consortium members really need and want, and where we could go with that proposal.
All right. Well, it sounds very promising, and I hope we continue to work together. And I guess also just as a minor follow-up, I was, I probably have heard about some of your work before with the surveys, but just really impressive to get 2,000 anglers or urban anglers and women anglers. That's really impressive and really important information.
Well, Nancy was doing all the nitty gritty of that work along the way, so we have to give her a lot of credit there.
Yeah, and I think you have presented, Nancy, on some of those results in the past. So yes, I just was reminded of it when I heard those figures. Thanks.
I note in the chat that all the work that Bruce talked about that Cornell did with the consortium was funded by GLRI. And reports and citations are all posted on the MDH website on the consortium web pages. So if anyone is interested in looking at those results, including the best practices that Bruce mentioned, everything is posted on the website.
Great. Thanks, Pat. Okay, well, we have about 15 minutes left. We can use that to talk about the consortium, I think, and this is a probably good segue hearing about from Cornell about how we might be able to continue as a consortium. And now on the agenda is what the consortium means to us as members, and what, perhaps to extend that, what we want from the consortium and what's most valuable. And I think it'd be great to hear from folks who have been with the consortium a long time, maybe some of the founding members, as well as folks who have just joined or who have only had minimal participation. It'd be great to hear from everybody. I mean, I guess I could start just by saying that I went to my first consortium meeting in 2018, like Brian did in Chicago, and I also had a great conversation with Jackie at that time, and I just really felt that I felt a welcoming and kind of a warmness from everybody, which made me feel welcome. And it was a in-person camaraderie, going out to restaurants and having drinks, and then also in the daytime attending talks some of which were very intellectually stimulating, and just getting to meet people in the same who had the same responsibilities and interests. And so it was an opportunity to learn and find out what others are doing. And since that time, I've found it very valuable in terms of just sometimes reaching out with questions. I often reached out to Pat with questions, trying to figure out, well, what do other states do when faced with this situation? And I'm continuing that practice. We reach out to various consortium members to try to find out information, and Pat has worked to consolidate that information in spreadsheets, and it's really been helpful. Jill's been great, even today, just helping with the timing of everything. So those are some of my thoughts, I guess, and I'd like to hear from others.
Yeah. So this is Wayne, and this discussion has a very specific purpose as well, because of dealing with leadership of the consortium. At our last virtual meeting last year, Pat proposed a leadership model where we'd have someone take on lead of sampling analysis and someone take on lead of outreach and education. I've taken on the sampling and analysis. We don't have someone for outreach and education, and I will be retiring reasonably soon. And so really the focus here is on, or some of where we need to go here is how we're going to make this organization continue. And so in putting this on the agenda in this way, the first step is really thinking about what the value of the consortium is to all of us, and then how do we make sure that that value persists. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Henry said, but that all applies to me as well. Just enormous benefit from colleagues and being able to share and learn from one another. So that's my sort of intro to this.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is Tony. I think that one of the great things, obviously, of a consortium is you get a bunch of instant friends. But anyways, the Mercury protocol, the PCB protocol, and now of course the PFAS protocol, those have all been invaluable to a lot of states. We're sort of a pooling of our resources. It's been pretty amazing, and I used to get yelled at because New York State took a long time to adopt the Great Lakes PCB protocol. We have, after a fashion, done that finally, so people don't yell at me anymore. So anyways, it's been a tremendous experience working with an amazing group of colleagues. Thanks.
Yeah, this is Andy. I've just historically, the consortia, everybody had a good time and got together well, but kind of historically, it was always a challenge to get people to step up to actually make a kind of long-term commitment of their time to maintaining the consortia. And I think, Pat, and our discussions earlier, that this kind of just one group taking on the leadership, that really began when we started to get funding, and somebody had to be a PI, and you really couldn't have a PI on a EPA grant where you're actually responsible for producing and have the grant at a different state. So you can't have a Minnesota PI on a Wisconsin grant. I mean, that's a challenge to do that, or on a New York grant. So we tried to bring them all together. And I think the proposal here is, what amount of time are people willing to put in, and can you define what you would like to contribute, or what your unique skills are in a given state that would parallel what we'd like to see the consortia do. That when we dealt with chloridane, several of the states were really facing that as a higher priority for them to address on their state, and it was helpful to have multiple states begin to share that load. So I think what we're looking for is, we need to have a leadership, and it can be a group leadership, and that if you're willing to do that, I think having people volunteer, and then trying to carve up the time and the activities so that it actually benefits all of us, and kind of rotate that responsibility. I think that in the last several years, that worked well with having different states take on kind of hosting the annual meeting, which is a somewhat of a thankless task. But I think rotating it through the states can, one, bring some visibility to your state's program, and not really have it all lean on one or two individual states. I mean, we can see how Derek feels, but many years there. We met in Chicago, and EPA was able to provide facilities and help with the organizational structure and the phone conference calls and things like that. So hopefully we can think about, do we want to do it in individual states? Are you able to travel? Or do we want to go back to trying to have a centralized or more centralized program in Chicago where EPA takes on some of the infrastructure planning for that?
And just to add to that also, whether or not we want to consider some sort of hybrid model where we have both in-person meetings and online meetings or combined meetings, because the online also allows a lot of staff to participate that wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think we have right now, we're really operating on going virtual, and I think that's worked quite well. And you look at the number of people that are on the call, that's far in excess of what we got on the in-person ones. Now, it was nice to meet in person and see other states' facilities. And at one point, those who were anglers go out and do a little fishing on the side. That was always a bonus activity. So if we decide to go virtual, I think that that may be, at least in the short term, a good solution to this.
Mm-hmm. Anything from any newer folks or people who haven't participated that long, or new to the consortium in general?
Henry, just pick one of them and ask them. You know, if everybody's we got a bunch of bumps on the logs here, and so we gotta raise their anxiety level a little bit and ask them to speak up.
Oh, I hate to do that. I don't know. All right. In terms of who came last year in New York, but I think, like, for example, Colleen, are you on the call? You probably participated virtually last year. Am I right about that?
Yes, I did.
Right. So so you haven't been to the in-person meetings, but I know you reached out to consortium members and by email, and I don't know, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I joined the consortium in last March, so right before the pandemic, so I haven't had the opportunity to meet anybody in person, but through emails and these meetings, I've been able to collaborate a little bit with folks in other states, and hopefully one day in the future, we can get back at these in-person meetings and maybe I'll have the opportunity to meet you all. But it's been a great experience so far, learning what other states are doing and being able to reach out, and everybody's been very welcoming. So appreciate that.
Right.
And I would just add one more thing, and that's when you look at what are the various functions that we have in place. We have the website that Minnesota maintained, and I don't know what is going to be the status of that. I think there's been a lot of excellent information on that. I know in Wisconsin, or at least we use that access to that quite a bit. I think that's a resource that we really want to maintain and not have it just drop off. So is there someone else who really likes to do that, or another state could pick that up? I don't know. Pat or others in Minnesota, is that going to be able to be maintained in Minnesota, or can it be transferred somewhere? And Wayne, I don't know if New York has that, or I think that would be a discussion the outreach community action group may want to talk about it. How do we maintain that physical site, as it were?
Yeah, so that's an element of the Cornell proposal, and if the grant is proposed, that's definitely something that Bruce, I think as Bruce mentioned it very quickly in passing, but so might have gotten missed. But part of one of the things that we want to do with the grant is to put that on a permanent footing that doesn't depend on one state.
This is Pat. I think the proposal talked about the SharePoint sites, not the content that's on the MDH websites, but
yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, that could certainly be discussed, but I did talk to my manager before I left, and he didn't seem to have a problem with keeping that content on there. Jill supports it, so I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that, Jill, or not.
I can keep working on it as long as we need it at this point. I have not been told otherwise. So that's what I'm going with.
Keep doing it and keep your head down.
To add to what we're talking about, just a little background too. Wayne and I discussed the concept of this discussion last spring, and that was when I was planning my exit. And we were trying to plan for the future of this group, and the idea for the discussion was to, at that point, was to try to understand what people value, like what Wayne said, and what are the needs of the group and what we want to or what wants to be continued in the future. And then after that, after he and I had that discussion, then the proposal with Cornell, excuse me, went forward. And so I think a lot of the logistics that are being discussed here are really dependent on whether that proposal gets funded by EPA. But the remaining thing is what Wayne mentioned is that, and Bruce mentioned that if Cornell is funded, they would do the administration of the consortium, but not be the technical lead. And so that is a gap that really needs to be decided. Like, how does the group want to technically lead the consortium? I'm really impressed with these past 2 virtual meetings that I've partially attended. I think the format has worked well, and I think that you guys are doing a great job of being a team and working together. And so hopefully this experience can help you to move forward in that kind of fashion to figure out a model to lead the group in the technical aspect. And then if for some reason the New York grant with Cornell is not funded, then some of the logistics could be discussed after that. I'm not sure. It's just like a kind of a little bit of a waiting game right now to see what happens with that proposal. But the remaining thing, as Wayne said, is to have people step up to help lead in a technical sense. And that really applies to both groups, the O&E and the S&A group, since Wayne said he's going to be retiring.
Yeah, and I'll say just the way this meeting came together, we had so we should acknowledge this. We had an, I guess, sort of ad hoc informal group of folks, and that included Satendra, Henry, Ali, me, and Jill, and I feel like I might be leaving one out. Oh, Andy. Let's see. Now, have I left anyone out? But I think that really worked well. Have I left anyone out?
Oh, I said I helped before I retired.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Thank you. And I think that really worked well. And one option is to more formally have a kind of a steering committee, and so maybe think about your interest in doing that.
Yeah, I'd be willing to continue to contribute to a committee.
I would as well, Miss Sally.
And I'm not looking for people, and now, I mean, I'm very happy to hear that, but that wasn't meant to, say, all right, I'm going to do this now, but very, very good for both of you. But it really is a something to think about. And, today was not also meant to be the end of the discussion, but the start of the discussion. It's one that we very definitely need to be working on in the next few months.
Yeah, and maybe one thing to do is to go back and look at the terms of reference, because that outlines kind of the goals and purpose of the group, and then the responsibilities of members and leadership, and see if those all still apply, and try to highlight the ones that people really value, and that would help the group maybe move forward in determining what is needed for leadership or membership.
And the terms of reference is on the SharePoint site, Pat?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Audrey. I would just like to say too, like, I think that the steering committee model is really nice, because then it's a group of folks, you're still collaborating across the states, which I think, is really great. Like despite it being kind of short and, random, I really enjoyed being able to collaborate with Tom on our water quality and fish consumption advisory discussion. And, I think for outreach purposes, everyone is kind of in a different spot in their outreach programs, but I always value hearing what other folks are going through and, different innovative techniques that they're using. I think that, being able to share the load is definitely something that is important, like for me personally right now. I think that if it was, like a steering committee type commitment where it's like you're planning the meeting for this 1 year, that's definitely something that I think is doable. And, as far as like the outreach discussions, I mean, it sounded like we wanted to have, based on some of our discussions today, it sounds like we should convene an outreach meeting. And I think that just like some check-ins, like help to carry those conversations forward.
Yeah.
All right.
And I've been doing my best to coordinate, and I won't say they're monthly because I haven't gotten my act together that well, but sampling and analysis calls. But but there has been no corresponding outreach and education. And what I'm hearing from Audrey is that would be pretty useful to do those, not monthly, on some more frequently than the annual.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has been missed. I don't know, like you said, I don't know that we would need to do it monthly. But at least maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, have check-ins, and then we can, if there are people that want to talk, or even just give like each go around and kind of give like a 10-minute summary of like what you guys have been up to, and discuss, like a kind of like a problem sharing session, I think is always helpful, because usually there's somebody else that has been there or is going through the same thing at the same time. And sometimes, it's nice to share recent outreach materials, or you have something that you haven't shared in a while and everybody's forgotten about it.
I just want to say that folks are starting to drop off the call. I know we're at 5 minutes past, and probably we can continue talking for those of us who want to. But I just want to say thanks for everybody joining, and if you need to go, that's fine. Do we want to continue, or?
This is Pat. I have a question related to what Audrey just said. I think that once Wayne hears back from EPA about the prospect of the funding, it would be useful to get an O&E group together to discuss the projects or the research or studies aspect of the Cornell proposal. Audrey, do you think that would be a useful thing to do?
Sure, I think that makes sense.
So maybe that could be, that could serve as one of the check-ins also, just, and have it a more focused topic call on what would be useful for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me when folks were talking later, we talked about, next step, if the grant is funded, is to do a work plan, that getting input from members of the consortium into that to make sure that it really works would be a good thing.
Yeah, it looks like the Cornell people might have dropped out, so.
Yeah, Bruce had mentioned that he had something at noon. That was his deadline. So.
Okay.
But
yeah,
there's Katie.
Quickly, Bruce did have to hop off, but that would be, I mean, from our perspective, that would be wonderful. We would love to get more feedback and thoughts on what would really be useful to you all. So it would be great to have a meeting.
I'm guessing EPA may know more about funding toward the end of the year or beginning of next year. I mean, based on my conversations with them about other grants, somewhere around December, January, they may. Well, of course, it's December now.
Yeah. So I noticed Derek was on for a while, and then was not for the Cornell. I'm going to suggest when the recording is available that he at least look at the Cornell section of this to get a better idea of what we're looking for, and then I'll try to follow up with him on status. So Ollie, can you? I know it's always been something of a ordeal to get the recordings posted, but I guess let me know when that happens.
I will. I have to send it off downtown to someone in IoT, so it usually takes a week or so to get the YouTube video.
Yep. Yeah. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just follow up with him, just send him an email message, say that that's coming, and I'll let him know when the time comes. I just want to keep mind share with him.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about before adjourning?
We have two more coming up. Remind people about the other two.
Yeah, we have a meeting next week, right? On the 9th, the 9th. Right, next Thursday.
Yep, we have our final virtual meeting session focusing on PFAS.
And is Derek going to say something?
I don't. He's not scheduled. We do have some EPA people associated with the PFAS roadmap who are going to listen in.
Yeah.
The thought there was that we might then have a sampling and analysis call with them where they can talk about the PFAS, the fish part of the roadmap, and but by the time I got around to contacting them, we'd had the agenda set, and it was kind of short notice to ask them to put together a presentation, and also that figured that them listening in and seeing what we do among ourselves would actually help them focus what they want to talk to us about.
Yeah, if you're going to talk to him or email with him, I would just reaffirm that at the meeting, everybody was very supportive of maintaining the consortia and participating, and our plan moving forward is very dependent upon the EPA funding and getting some information on that as soon as possible.
Yep. Okay. Got it.
We really have not developed a plan B at this point because we've had such strong support from EPA in the past, and we're hoping that will continue going forward as well. I would just try to, let them know that, we don't have a plan sitting in the wings if we don't at least get one of the grants and get Cornell's involvement in it.
Yeah. Okay. I think I might have misunderstood what you said and responded to the wrong thing, but I got that, so I put that in my message to him. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I didn't see how long he was on, but what he heard, but hopefully he interpreted it positively, and I would just tell him that we take it positively.
Yeah. No, I saw him earlier, but by the time Cornell had started, he was not there.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, I'll just do a check in with him.
Yeah.
I know in the past, and he maybe dropped off because Jackie would exit the room or vacate when we started talking about prospective grant proposals and details.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you recall how she would say, she can't hear this.
I think that this mainly applied to before we submitted our ideas.
Oh, okay.
I thought she said it opened up once those were,
Yeah.
presented.
Once proposals were in, then, but she didn't want to listen to some, and then people would feel if they weren't there, they were left out and at a disadvantage.
So at a different time in the process, she's allowed to participate then? Okay. All right, well, as others had said, I miss her presence as well. But this was a good meeting. Thank you for pulling this off, and I look forward to next week's discussion on PFAS. Thank you. I do have to drop off. I have some meetings this afternoon I have to prepare for. But thank you again.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks,
See you next week.
Yeah, bye, Tom.
Bye.
Good job, Henry.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
You kept it
Yes,
moving
well
along.
done.
And there were no little snafu at the beginning, but once we got everybody up to speed, it transitioned between states very well.
Yeah, no, it was great. I thought everyone did a great job. Great presentations, great content. Thank you, everybody. All right. I will leave the meeting and